This is Bill Brady on the Pulse of Arizona, 1100 KFNX. Our election 2024 coverage continues. Today, another interview in Congressional District number 3. Alan Aversa is with us. He is on the ballot as the Green Party candidate. He doesn't really have a primary, but he is in for the long haul for the general election, and he will have opponents, without a doubt, on both Democratic and Republican side. Alan Aversa, good to have you with us today.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me on. Glad you reached out, and I'm trying to interview all the candidates in the race, not just Democrats and Republicans, so thank you.
Well, it's good to have you here. We'll get into a little of your history. You've run for office before, but let's define so people from the beginning of the interview know if you are their potential congressman or not. If you could give us a description of Congressional District 3, or as they say it in your business, CD3.
Yeah, CD3, it's about 60% Hispanic, so primarily a lot of religious Christians live in that district. It's about half Democrat, about 40%, well, actually about 15% Republican. So, I mean, there's a big discrepancy. So I want to give the independents an opportunity to have a candidate to vote for.
Now, where is the district, though?
So it ranges from 48th Street on the far east side all the way up to about 99th Ave on the far west side, and all the way up as far north as Glendale Ave and as far south as South Mountain.
Pretty good way of describing it. Now, you have run for office before. You're a University of Arizona graduate. Mm-hmm. You've run for office before in several different circumstances. There is a overriding issue for you, and that is the abortion or pro-life issue.
Mm-hmm. That's correct. Yeah, so I was a student at the U of A. I had a friend that approached me. He was trying to start up a pro-life club at the university, and I didn't really know much about the topic or the political ramifications of the topic, but I started reading about it more and getting really interested in supporting the pro-life movement.
Well, what is it in your head, heart, and soul that causes you to be committed to the pro-life movement in the way you are?
I think it was my mother. So I would have had a sibling. I'm an only child. My mother had an ectopic pregnancy, which was very traumatic. I mean, it's not an abortion, the procedure to treat that. You know, I knew what was going on. I was 5 years old at the time, and I knew my mother, was having a lot of internal bleeding, and I knew what was going on. So I thought, well, there's a life. There's something was living inside of her that's no longer there. And I could feel that loss of not having a sibling. That's from very young age what made me aware of what the pro-life issue is and what abortion is. And
so in your view then, unless there's a miscarriage, that fetus carried to term will be a human being.
Yeah, so I mean, it's mother and a father. Their genetic code comes together at conception. The conceived fetus is not like any other cell in the mother's body. It has its own unique DNA. Science and genetics shows this. It's not a cat. It's not a monkey. It's a human being.
I've heard people say, and it's something people don't think about because they think of the fetus as a fetus, and they don't think about it from the standpoint of it is not terminated. The fetus is going to grow into a human being, and a human being who could be a quite substantial human being.
Yeah, could be the next president of the United States, the next person to cure cancer, or many possibilities. Yeah.
How have you gone through life? Your position is one that you feel very strongly from our conversations. Mm-hmm. How have you been able to deal with life and people who have widely different points of view in regard to this?
At the U of A, when I was pro-life club president, I'm very used to talking to people with completely diametrically opposed views. But you can always find common ground. There's always some issue that we agree on. The most radical pro-abortion, all the way up to birth promoter, I could find some common ground with that person and try to understand why they think the way that they do.
Alan Aversa is with us. He is a Green Party candidate for Congress in Congressional District number 3. His primary issue is the anti-abortion or pro-life issue. Alan, as you go through this, do you find that anybody really wants to terminate a pregnancy, or do they do it because of circumstance?
Well, 90% of abortions occur with mothers that are perfectly healthy, of babies that are perfectly healthy. I mean, it's a very small fraction is due to medical complications or any other reasons like that. So the way I see it, I mean, when people talk about abortion, it's being basically used as a form of birth control, 90% of them.
Are they doing it because of circumstance, because the woman's alone?
I think a lot of the reasons they don't have any other choices. They think that they're being forced into it. That's why I'm also a big promoter of the pregnancy resource centers. There's one right down the street here. There's about 6 of them in the Phoenix Valley that help women realize that there's other options. Abortion is not their only option when they're in an unplanned pregnancy. And these resource centers need to be supported by the state and by the community.
Are they?
No, generally not, and not with our current administration in Arizona. I don't know if you know what Maggie's Place is. So Maggie's Place is a homeless shelter for pregnant women. Our governor took funding away from Maggie's Place,
I didn't know that.
Which would be surprising. If you want to support women that are in an unplanned pregnancy, you should be supporting these organizations. But they try to promote the lie that, they're not real medical doctors. They're not a real clinic. They're not up to the medical standards, and which is completely false. I mean, they have actual doctors, actual registered nurses working at these pregnancy resource centers. So there's a couple of them, like Choices Pregnancy, Aid to Women's Center. There's a handful of good ones in the Phoenix area that need our support. Many people don't know about that. They'll even support them not just up to birth, but even after birth. If they need help getting a job, if they need shelter, if they need diapers, they'll help the women with this. So people need to realize that there's more options. When pro-choice people say that I'm for choice as well. But when abortion is the only choice that's presented to these mothers, that's not a real choice. You need to have options to make a real choice. You can't just say this is the only thing. That's not a choice.
Well, by definition, it would not be. But it would also seem that if we are looking at this from all angles, that either terminating a pregnancy or carrying it to term are two options, but the carrying it to term is an option that may require some support.
Yeah, of course. You need support.
So this organization that you mentioned, is it still open? Is it still operating?
Yeah, it's still operating, but they're struggling.
Well, it's certainly an emotional issue, but it's also a case of where if people truly want to support all women in this circumstance, that it is an area and is an option that should be supported, and not just be supported by private funding, but supported by government funds as well.
Yeah, I agree.
Alan Aversa is with us. Alan is a congressional candidate in what they call CD3, Congressional District 3. His primary issue is the pro-life issue. We've been talking about that. There are other issues in this race, and we will come back and talk about those with Alan Aversa, Green Party candidate for Congress in CD3. Bill Brady on the Pulse of Arizona, 1100 KFNX. This is Bill Brady on the Pulse of Arizona, 1100 KFNX. Our election 2024 coverage continues. Every election cycle, KFNX dedicates itself to interviewing as many of the candidates as possible. It doesn't matter what the political perspective is, what the issues may be. We cover it all. With us today, Alan Aversa. Alan is the Green Party candidate in Congressional District Number 3. Now, he doesn't have a primary, but he will have a general election.
Well, there is a primary, but I'm the only one on the ballot.
That kind of solves that problem.
Yeah.
Then you will have opponents, because there are 3 people running in the Democratic primary, 2 in the Republican primary. So you will have people who will join you for the general election. Alan's primary issue as a candidate is the pro-life, anti-abortion issue. We covered that in segment 1, and we will come back to that before the end of this segment. There are other issues that you would have to deal with if you were a congressman from CD3, as they say. One of them is the homelessness issue. I drove by a site in your district this morning where the police were, it appeared, rounding up the homeless. How would you deal with that? What does the government, the federal government, need to do in regard to the homeless issue?
So the homeless issue is really linked to the unemployment problem. So that's another big issue that we see. I don't think the solution is just to give free shelter for people. I mean, that's not sufficient. They need to be given opportunities to find jobs, to keep themselves occupied, learn a new skill. Out by the airport here, there's a company that trains manual labor, how to do welding, how to do HVAC. These sort of things should be promoted for these people so they can get a well-paying job and get off the street. A lot of it, and I've met homeless people. Some of them, yeah, they just want to be on the street. They have drug problems. They don't want to get out of that situation. But others tend to be there because of unemployment. It's a really interesting statistic. About 3/4 of the homeless are males, unemployed males that end up on the streets. And, why did they get there? A lot of it has to do with loss of job.
To your point, I have met people who actually work with the homeless today who had been homeless themselves. So it's something that people can fall into in this life. Now, there are others who are simply a result of poverty and homelessness, but there are substance abuse and mental health issues as well.
Fentanyl is a big issue. I have a friend that works for a staffing agency, and in his parking lots, there'll be 20 or 30 people just sprawled out on the parking lot, just really almost in a coma from the fentanyl use. One time, the firefighter had to come by and do the EpiPen shot into them, but he had to use 4 or 5 of those to get this one guy out of his state of... I mean, it's a serious problem.
The thing that's just amazing to me, Alan, when we look at this is that how do people get this way and how do they stay this way?
Yeah, we should be giving them opportunity. I mean, the government's role should be to help them get opportunities to get out of their situation, not just give them 90 days of shelter or air conditioning and that's it. I mean, there needs to be more than that.
Yeah, usually they didn't get in it in that shorter period of time. They're not going to get out of it in that period of time. Alan Aversa is with us. He is a congressional candidate, Green Party candidate in Congressional District number 3. I don't do this enough when we do these interviews, but cover for us again, what is the territory of Congressional District number 3?
So on the far east side, it's 48th Street. Far west side is 99th Ave, and it goes all the way from northern part of South Mountain all the way up to about Glendale Ave. It's a pretty big region.
And it's most of the city of Phoenix.
Yeah, downtown Phoenix is in CD3.
Now, there are other issues. The homeless one is certainly a very visible one, but there are other issues as well. Immigration is a big issue, which also probably contributes to the homeless issue. What is your stance on the immigration issue?
So states have a right to defend their borders. And I think it's a complicated situation because there's a lot of people in the United States that depend upon immigrants for work. But again, this kind of ties back to the homelessness unemployment issue. And why are there so many unemployed citizens in Arizona? Because we have these immigrants competing for those positions. So I'm definitely in favor of Arizona defending its borders and giving opportunities for people to come into the United States legally.
They're also probably contributing to the unemployment issue. I worked in a different place in the state of Florida at one point, and you would have a place in the city where the people who wanted to work in construction would gather every day, and the contractors would come by and pick them up, and they would go off and they would do, I guess, day labor in regard to that. Well, if you've got more people who are in that line, then there are going to be more people who are not going to be employed that day as a result, and that theoretically contributes to the homeless situation. Mm-hmm. And it also exacerbates the housing situation, because I heard of situations, we're not putting anybody down here, but situations where you would have 10 people, for instance, living in the same housing unit because they all pooled their money and were able to pay for the housing unit. But on the other hand, somebody who is a single person then is priced out of that unit. It's definitely a very complex issue. So
I used to live about 10 minutes north of the southern border in Sierra Vista. And even back then, this was 10 years ago, even back then we would see all kinds of people's clothes and all sorts of trash in the washes. And this was from the immigrants even back then. I mean, it was a huge issue. I can't imagine what it's like by the border today. But 10 years ago, I mean, if it was that bad back then, there's got to be a lot more now.
Without a doubt. Alan Aversa is with us. He is a Green Party candidate for Congress in Congressional District number 3. His primary issue is the pro-life, anti-abortion issue. Alan, as we come to this point in the interview, I want to give you an opportunity to speak again to that issue, because that's really the issue that's animated you. You ran for, was it the House in Iowa?
Yeah, ran for U.S. House in Iowa in 2012 in the southeastern district of Iowa. So that was my first time running for a federal position.
But this is the issue that's a driver for you.
Yes, that's correct.
What, for people who are just tuning in now, why is it so important to you? What is your passion for this issue? It's enough to have made you take out papers and run for office.
It's a big issue in the United States. Europe and other countries, it's not such a prominent issue, but in the United States, I think it's because we have more political freedoms here. We can express our views about these topics that matter, and we actually think that we can change what people think about this. So I believe that we start as a human being when the sperm and egg come together of the mother and father, and this forms a new sort of cell called the zygote, which is not like any other cell in the human body. It has different genetics, half the father's genetics, half the mother's genetics. It's on, and it has the potential to keep growing and to turn into a full-grown human being. And just because the unborn human is smaller doesn't mean they have any less value.
Rights.
Or rights, yeah. Generally, women are smaller than men, right? But that doesn't mean that women have less rights than men. I mean, they're both equally human. Same with the unborn. The fact that they're inside the womb versus outside the womb, does that change whether they have rights, where they're located? No, they still have rights.
Alan Aversa, thank you for being here today. If people want to help out with your campaign, if they want to make a contribution, if they want to find out more about Alan Aversa, how can they do that?
So you can visit my website. It's Aversa, A-V, like Victor, ERSA.vote. That's aversa.vote. And you can find out all the information about me, my contact. You can follow me on Twitter. You can make contributions there. So if you like my message and want to help me out, you can reach out there on the website. It's aversa.vote.
Aversa.vote. Alan, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for interviewing me.
Good to have you with us today. Alan Aversa is the Green Party candidate for U.S. Congress in Congressional District number 3, all part of KFNX's 2024 election coverage, which will continue now for months. Alan Aversa, thank you for being here today. Bill Brady on the Pulse of Arizona, 1100 KFNX.